Call the September 23rd meeting to order. Please turn your microphones on and put your cell phones away, and remember to be honored by me when you raise your hand so you can be sure that you are heard when the time comes if you want to speak. Also, I was asked by Steve Hansen back here, who does our taping, and we appreciate that a lot. He would like it for everybody to be sure and talk in their microphones, because he says when he does the videos, and puts them up, some people are hard to hear. So just make sure that you speak out and speak into your microphone. So thank you. Okay, Jamie.
Penny Bristow. Here. Chris Freeman.
Here.
Heather Daniels. Here. Clint Moses.
Here.
Dan Paulson.
Here.
David Lou Swanson.
Here.
Dave Steyer.
Here.
Jim Swanson.
Here.
Tricia Thompson.
Okay, Tricia is excused. She's seeing the governor tomorrow morning because she's working on a bill that they're trying to pass that has to do with working with families with students with disabilities, which is one of her passions, so we wish her well. Okay, any...
This is not starting.
Okay, is there any... anybody want to change the agenda order? Everything's okay with the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Moving on. Okay, I do have one recommendation right now. Commendation right now. So, Lynn Yeager, are you here?
Yes.
Please come forward. The Board of Education of the School District of the Menomonie area recognizes Lynn Yeager for her outstanding service as a special needs bus driver. Lynn goes above and beyond daily to meet the needs of all students. She greets each child by name, plays fun music, and is extremely patient. Thank you for all you do for kids. Did you get it? Okay, next is community communications, and I did not get it here, but nobody wants to say anything?
Before you leave, Ryan, just want to say thanks for coming today.
Yeah, no problem.
Board members, we haven't met Ryan Howell. Ryan's working real closely with us from Menomonie Transportation. So thank you to you and all the drivers.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You guys do a great job.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Board Superintendent Communications, board members? Okay, I do have a request again from Steve Hansen. He'd like to thank you so much for the card at the board signed for him a few weeks ago. So just wanted to let you know about that. Dr. Joe?
A few things, and I'll try to keep it brief because I do know that the homecoming kickoff occurs tonight at Wilson Park, starting at 6 o'clock, and then 7 o'clock the pep band will be playing. It was a great state superintendent conference last week. It's always real powerful to be in the state capitol and to hear the annual State of Education address. Tony Evers, he came and met with all the superintendents in the morning. Also, it's always nice to see Mrs. Ann Hasse. She's a 5th grade teacher here in the school district. She was 2014 State Teacher of the Year, so her and other State Teachers of the Year get together on this day each year and meet with DPI and run through a list of recommendations. So just a very powerful conference. I'm very happy to say that even though a lot of the trends that we're seeing across the state with mental health concerns and the importance of social emotional learning, and talking to my colleagues and hearing some of the presentations, I really feel like what we're doing in our school district is ahead of the curve in a lot of those areas. And certainly there's more work to do, and we'll continue to do that. I mentioned homecoming is this week. The parade is Friday. I did hear back from a few board members. We'll be lining up around 3:30. The parade starts at 4 o'clock. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out to me. It's right by the Leisure Center where we line up. On October 2nd, the Woodland Sky Native American Dance Company will be here to give presentations to all of our students in grades 4 through 12. There's going to be 2 presentation times, one in the morning at the high school and then one in the afternoon at the middle school. We really appreciate the support from Menomonie Cares, also the Rotary Club of Menomonie. We received grants from both organizations to help fund this real terrific opportunity for our students. There is a ribbon cutting at the high school for the new credit union office, and that's noon on October 4th. There is an RSVP link attached there in board docs, so if any board members would like to attend, please go ahead and RSVP with the credit union. And then we're also very excited about our employee perception survey. That window opens actually tomorrow and runs through October 10th. So the staff have been notified. We've worked with school perceptions. Again, we worked with them 3 years ago, and we can't wait to get that feedback from our staff. That's all. Oh, last thing. Mesa Wilson, our student rep from the student body. I really appreciated Jamie. On Friday, she was able to line up an interview with Mesa. So halftime of the football game, Mesa came on the radio in Eau Claire at Carson Park and gave about a 5 to 10 minute interview about all the activities coming up. So she did a terrific job. Kudos to her and all of the student council members.
Also, I just want the board to note that like this afternoon, I had asked Joe if he would go ahead and let us be able to see what the staff survey looked like so that it's there for you to look at too if you didn't have a chance, because that came late this afternoon. So you know exactly what the teachers are getting and responding to, or not just teachers, but all staff. Thank you. Okay, action agenda. I entertain a motion to approve the recommended changes to substitute teacher compensation. Dave and Penny? Any discussion? Joe?
I just want to point out, when we met last time, we talked about increasing the daily sub rate to $115. After talking with all of the superintendents at CISA 11 and hearing about what some other people are planning to do over the next few weeks, I do feel it's important that we move that to $120 per day. The rest of the recommendations are as presented last time and summarized in the attachment in board docs. Thank you.
Any questions before we vote? Okay, Jamie?
He's going to be on the second.
Dan, would you like to just give a voice vote?
Oh, yes. That's
Thank you.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, moving right along to discussion items. We have some middle school character dare program report people here. So come up and you can do your presentation. We look forward to it.
So while they're getting ready, Mr. Betcher, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about the program here. I know I got a chance to follow along on Twitter, but Mr. Betcher, could you please introduce our school counselors and kind of kick off the presentation?
Sure.
Thank you.
So we're very fortunate to have our three counselors here. Nancy Horner is our veteran counselor. She works with our 7th graders this year, so we have a counselor with each grade now. Katie Hugo works with our 8th graders, and Michaela Segula works with our 6th graders. And I think the format is working great. They see the counselors in the pod each day and things, but this was something, this character dare was an incredible kickoff to the year for our students to have some time to reflect on a lot of the good things that they do each and every day. I won't steal their thunder because they did.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'll just briefly tell you kind of what we did, how and why we did it. So our objective, as Mr. Becker said, with the Character Dare program was to start our school year off with high expectations for kindness and character, and to give students an intentional opportunity to think about the great things that they're doing every single day, the small little things. So we developed 6 character dares that reflect the core values of the middle school. And we put them on posters for everybody to see. There was at least one poster in every classroom. They were in the hallways and in the cafeterias. So students were reminded of them constantly. So students were challenged to complete these 6 dares in genuine and creative ways, and they recorded them daily with their peers, teachers. Each pod had a goal of completing 500 character dares throughout the week, Monday to Friday, and the school-wide goal was to complete 5,000 character dares throughout the week. So our outcome, the 7th grade gold pod recorded the highest number of dares at 1,279 Monday to Friday. Our school total was 5,189.
I want a recount on that.
We told him he is welcome to complete the recount independently if he would like. So all pods that met their goal were rewarded by enjoying some donuts to kick off our Monday last week. And then each grade level was rewarded by pieing the principals at lunch, 3 separate times for each lunch at each grade level last Friday. And in the week following the Character Dare Challenge, which was last week, we truly did notice students making extra efforts to continue those acts of kindness. Our cafeteria has been exceptionally clean. We've noticed students helping each other out in very intentional and genuine ways. So we do feel that it's been a lasting impact. So we do intend to bring this Character Dare Challenge back later in the school year, and in the meantime, we do continue to display our posters, so it's not something that's going away. And just reminding students that small acts of everyday kindness really do make a difference in our school culture and climate. Thanks for having us. Thank you.
I just want to say something. So I did not read all 5,000 character dares, but my favorite one that I did read was, I told my grandma that she was beautiful.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you.
Oh, before you sit down, I think
Yeah.
Amy has some certificates for you.
Please come forward to the very front, very, very front. I certainly appreciate counselors. I have a school guidance and counseling degree, and so I know exactly what you've gone through. I've been through some of those things, and I appreciate everything that you do. So all of you are getting awards.
Why don't you guys move over so we can get a couple pictures of you there? Perfect.
All of you are getting an award for your role in the implementation of the Character Dare program. MMS counselors are daring students to do something every day that represents the core values of the Menomonie Middle School: responsibility, respect, enthusiasm, safety, empathy, and pride. So, Michaela Segula, Katie, and the veteran. You've been here as long, I think longer than I have.
Just about the same. These ladies are doing a wonderful job. I'm really glad to have them.
Thank you.
Great job.
I just want to say I think that's a fantastic program, and I really enjoyed reading about it in your announcements, and I just, wow, it just, thank you so much.
Okay. Discussion item B, student enrollment update. I believe that would be Tonya?
So the spreadsheet that's attached is not our official third Friday count. Third Friday was this last Friday. It does take a little bit of time to calculate, and then the report is actually not due until after that. Students have to attend before the third Friday and after the third Friday in order for us to count, because as you know, some students may have been ill or out of town or something, and they weren't in session on Friday. Our count, and so the total on here is 3411, and that is actually the number of bodies that we have in our building. And it's not the actual third Friday count that gets recorded. And that is actually down from previous years. So I anticipate that our count this year will be lower than it was last year.
Any questions for Tony at all? It will be interesting to see. We had a summer school presentation with Mrs. Bakley last meeting, and we had a summer school program that goes into our overall count.
It does, yes.
So when we actually get our final figures, it'll be interesting to see how it compares. But in terms of just pure bodies and the seats, it looks like we're about 22 students less in 2019 than last year. So, thanks, Tony.
Okay. Letter C, annual achievement SLO report for all grades. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, Brian Seglin, has worked with the principals to put this report together. Brian, go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
All right, so this is the first of two reports that I'll be giving to the board this fall related to overall student achievement and growth. The bulk of this presentation or this report focuses on our state level achievement results from last spring, our state assessments that are given in the spring of each year. At the elementary and middle level, that is the Wisconsin Forward exam. At the high school level, it has been the ACT exam in the 11th grade. And last year, for the first time, not given, but the first time that it will roll into an overall accountability rating, the ACT Aspire assessment that's given in 9th and 10th grade will factor into this as well. In addition, the buildings and the district as a whole, we set goals that refer to it as student learning or school learning objectives, SLOs. Actually, the second attachment that was included in board docs for review, the building SLO report, provides a kind of a high-level overview of what those goals were last year, how we did in relation to reaching those goals, and then the goals that are set for next year. One of the additional factors that we pull into this report is our STAR assessments that we give. There's an early literacy assessment that's given in kindergarten through 2nd grade that assesses some of those foundational pieces. And then there's the STAR reading and math assessment. Those assessments are given 3 times during the year. It gives us an initial snapshot as to what growth looks like throughout the course of the year ahead of that state assessment that we take, the forward exam. So there are some correlations between how our students do on that assessment and how they perform on the state level assessment, but again, it's not an exact replica of that assessment. As you go through, you'll notice that when we take a look at the goals that we set, some of the goals at the district level we hit, some of them we did not. We did increase the level of proficiency that we were looking for, as well as the growth that we were looking for last year over previous years, because what we were finding is we were starting to hit many of those goals, but we weren't yet rising to a level of overall student achievement that we felt was something that we wanted to see. So in an effort to align attaining our district level goals as well as overall proficiency levels, we wanted to bring those in a little bit closer alignment. And knowing that goals are something that we're striving for, trying to set some rigorous but attainable goals so that we're not changing those goals year after year after year. So you can kind of see that. At the building level, you'll notice that some buildings had very similar goals last year to other buildings because they had identified similar needs, but there was some uniqueness from building to building, and you can see the summaries there. Overall, as far as the building level goals that we set, you'll notice as you go through that we hit 10 of 23 of the goals that were set, about 43.5% of those goals. One of the goals at the middle school, the state hasn't yet finalized the overall attendance data for last year. So we anticipate hitting that goal, but we can't check it off saying mission accomplished yet on that because the state hasn't finalized that data. But our local data shows that it looks like we're likely to have hit that, and the middle school has adjusted that goal accordingly. As we transition into the state level assessments, and that's the second report that's included in there, that takes a look specifically at that forward exam. And for state level accountability purposes, it's for English language arts and math. That assessment also assesses 4th graders, 8th graders, and 10th graders on social studies. And it assesses 4th graders and 8th graders on science. At the high school level, our science assessment at the state level is the ACT science assessment. But science and social studies don't factor into overall state level accountability for the goals that are set at the state level. As you take a look at those results, you'll notice that locally, regionally, and across the state, kind of a generality, there's a general downward trend that is occurring across the state as it comes to the overall proficiency levels. If you looked at the media coverage of state assessment, from out of DPI, out of Madison, they've reported on that as well. Our teams at the building levels are taking a look at a lot of factors. We did notice a year ago that our overall proficiency level was slightly lower than it was the year before. So part of the goal setting process and plans we put in place were in response to that, but you don't want to change everything that you're doing or make a lot of modifications based off of 1 year's worth of data. You want to take a look at things over time. We did notice last year, much like the state as a whole, slightly lower than it was the previous year. So we're continuing to take a look at our practices. We did several things last year and then continued that work. One area that I'd like to say that I think we're definitely on the right track with as far as the work that we prioritize in the area of literacy is digging into what we're doing in the area of writing. Every building across the district has placed an emphasis on doing some work in the area of writing. That work started last school year. It continued over the summer and is continuing into this school year as well. So I really want to provide an opportunity for questions and conversations as far as we go in. But ultimately, one thing to point out that our state level assessments as well as our local measures that we're using, they all represent one of several measures that we use to identify priorities across the district. As we take a look at some of the things that, in addition to the professional development and the work that our buildings have identified as far as goals, that is definitely a positive that we see. When we start to take a look at subgroups and performance of subgroups, what we're finding here at the state level is they're talking about, in several cases over years, widening of achievement gaps. We take a look at the gaps that are present within our identified populations, students with identified disabilities, English language learners. As we take a look at that, in many cases, the overall performance of those groups mirrors the overall performance of our students as a whole. So when we see a peak in a year, we tend to see a peak within those subgroups. When we see a dip, we do a lot of times see that dip in overall performance. So we expect there to be a gap, and we notice that in most cases those trend lines mirror that. One thing to point out is we did notice over the last few years an actual narrowing of the achievement gap at the the 3 through 8th grade level with our ELL student population in the area of English language arts. So that's something to call out. We have made some investments in the area of English language learners and staff. As a board, you've supported some additional positions associated with that. So I feel like we're on the right track with some of these pieces as we look at the work that we're doing. But again, it is something that we've noticed for the last 2 years, some overall downward trends. We've noticed a little more stable performance at the middle school in relation to what we're seeing at the state level over the last few years. This year, when we get our report cards, which really emphasize not just the achievement, but also the growth that happens, we can really start to dial into where are the areas that we're having the biggest impact with our students, because we know that achievement, or proficiency level, I should say, with achievement is just one aspect of it. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? David?
What percent of the students actually take this test?
Yep, so our overall participation rate, depending on grade levels, is usually between about upper 96% and 97%. A high number of students take it. Across the state, it's a little bit lower. Target test rate, you need to have at least 95% of your student population take the assessment, and we exceed that. We do have some students that do take an alternate assessment, referred to as the dynamic learning maps. However, that is limited to 1% of our overall student population. So when you take a look at our students who have been identified with disabilities, they have to meet a certain criteria in order to be eligible to take that assessment. And what we do find when we take a look is our students who are identified to take that assessment do quite well typically on that assessment. It's a challenging process for some of them, but you know, again, I feel our students are well prepared for that as well.
Clint?
Brian, have the measurements changed, or I should say, is this a moving target or rising bar? Has everything been the same since 2015?
Yeah. So the short answer is it's the same assessment. Different sets of standards are tested from year to year. It's not a scenario where every single English language arts or math standard is tested year to year. You know, they have some areas that are tested more frequently or more heavily, and we've noticed that. But you know, we have used that forward assessment now going back to 2014, 2015 was the first year of that assessment. You know, and as far as the proficiency levels, the cut scores for that, those have remained consistent. So from a moving target standpoint, you know, not as far as what it means for a student to be proficient, as far as what specific content standards, yes, those do change from year to year. And the goal is over, I believe it's a 6-year window, that all standards will have shown up at least at one point in time. I will point out that the science assessment, which is the results for the elementary and middle science assessment, are not included in here. This last year, that assessment did change. Over previous years, it's based off of our new Wisconsin science standards. And the social studies assessment that's included on there, that's actually based off of our old Wisconsin model academic standards. Those are undergoing reworks as far as the state level assessment, so that will change. And we'll see where that goes.
I just noticed there was a drastic decline, not necessarily for our district, but some of the others after the first or second year. And then my second comment on that is who's giving Hudson all the answers?
So, yeah, you know, I could talk a lot about demographic profiles. One of the reasons that I do think it's important that we include some regional comparisons is for 2 reasons. One, I think it's important to look at trends over time. You know, no one year tells the whole story, and I think you can go off in some directions that you know, really can have some problems associated with them if you base your results or your actions off of 1 year. But the other reason that I like to include the trends of what does our trend line do in relation to the other trend lines? Do we, you know, we may be at a different place year to year, but do our trends follow that of other districts across the state and the region? But also, if there is a district that their trend line is going in a completely different direction, I would like to know, you know, a little bit more about what's happening. You know, is there something related to their educational programming? Has their demographics drastically shifted? And some of those pieces. But you know, we do know that you know, we do have some regional districts that historically always do very well. They have some very different demographics than we do. So in that case, I'm very interested in their trend lines.
David?
Do you think the full-time interventionist position at Knapp and Downsville is going to make a significant change in these scores?
Well, I feel that that's one of the short answer is I feel it's going to help us to address some of the needs that are present. You know, when we take a look at needs and we talk about equitably servicing our students, you know, if we have disproportionate needs, we need to do that differently. You know, it is going to allow us to both focus on academics in both the areas of literacy and mathematics, but also other contact areas, as well as some of the more challenging behaviors we've seen in those buildings and helping to free up staff to be able to do some of those things. And also serve as a resource to some of our newer staff members that, you know, as far as access to some coaching and things like that. So it's going to take a while for us to see what type of impact it has, but I've been very encouraged by the conversations that have been able to take place in both of those buildings since adding those positions, not just with the interventionists, but at a classroom level and with the building administrators. I think it's a good addition.
I agree.
Chris?
At an interpretive level, and this gets at what Clint, I think, brought up earlier,
It's important to remember that Menomonie has got like the highest poverty rate in the state. We're at like a 24% poverty rate, and the highest proportion of poor people in our city are girls between the ages of 9 and 13. Look at Hudson, they got a 7% poverty rate. When you look at the other schools that have a low performing, Falls is about 18% poverty rate. And what's that Rice Lake school? I think they're like 16%. So we're at a significant disadvantage, and we should note that the way in which that schools are funded isn't adjusted based on the needs that we have. So, you know, rich schools get more money than poor schools. Also, a voucher program takes $300 million out of our state public education before we get a penny. And I really think that as the school board and as a district, we need to be more proactive about informing voters what's happening and why. So for you not to say that 70% of our kids aren't proficient in a number of important indicators, it's really important that our voters understand that. And that comes from a real historical, but also timely situation and directions for funding. Another thing that's important is to note that almost all of our students in Wisconsin, across the board, they're not even proficient. It's been that way for 5 years. And so I think our school district does a great job. Like, our kids learn a lot, but it doesn't come out in the school scores. So thinking about transforming how we teach our kids according to get better scores maybe is a bad idea. I also noticed that our kids did much better in shorter tests. The social studies exam is much shorter than the other exams. It's only 35 minutes. And there's only so much time a kid can spend in front of a computer. I don't know if you know what it's like for those kids when they're taking those computer-generated tests, but it's pretty miserable. They all come home with headaches. I don't even have my kids take that test anymore. So when we think about how we're approaching this, there's some information that we need to get to our voters. By that measure, we're failing. But that means that there's something wrong with the measure. We got to think about that because we spend millions of dollars on this measure. And if it's not measuring the right things, then that's a big problem. So I think it's important that we don't put a spin on this. We are doing worse than most other school districts. And we had a dip that we're affected unfairly by the way in which schools are funded. And our voters should know that. And when we take that into account, I think that can really change how we think about what our object is as a school board in informing not just, our administration, but informing our stakeholders why we're underperforming. Our teachers are doing a great job, and we're performing in ways, especially with SEL, that is like super heartwarming. So making that clear, I think, would be important for us. I don't think we do a good job informing our stakeholders about the nature of what the real results are and what the problems are in those results.
Dan?
I would just like to reaffirm that I think our teachers are doing an incredible job. But let me get this correct. You said that there were some areas in which we were showing some closing of the gaps because of some programs and initiatives. Could you elaborate more on that? Is that something that we should do more of, or what's happening?
Yeah, so what I was referencing was with our English language learners, students who English would not necessarily be their first language or primary language. They're learning English as a language, much like another student would learn another language, yet they're in classes alongside their peers. When we look at English language arts as an assessed area, one of the areas that historically English language learners don't do as well as their peers who are non-English language learners. When we look historically across this over the last few years, we've started to see a closing of the gap where, in comparison to their non-ELL peers, they're not at the level of proficiency, but they're more proficient than they were. So when you look at their trend lines, And depending on a particular grade level, we may see that more so than not. When we take a look at the percentage of students who take that assessment or are served, we want to be careful when we report out publicly, because when a group gets too small, then one or two students will swing that overall trend line quite a bit. So you always want to use caution when your n size gets smaller. And one of the things that we have done is, over the last few years, we've spent time looking at what is it that our students need in that area to be successful. Tried some different things out. We've had some very talented staff in those areas. And then going into this school year, we've added an ELL instructor. Going in. So we're looking at doing things differently. Chris mentioned funding. We do receive a small level of federal funding associated with ELL. Does not cover, so it's a local decision. And we appreciate the work that the board has done and our staff have done to advocate for that. And then when we take a look at one of the changes that we have seen over the years, that 1% participation rate for students participating in the alternate assessment, that number changed a few years ago. We used to have a larger percentage of students that took the alternate assessment. So that is something that has changed over the years while we've given the assessment. And then, the other thing, which I think is a success that needs to be celebrated but doesn't necessarily show up in the data, is when we exit a student out of our programs that serve our identified populations, when they reach a threshold where they may no longer be served through special education or monitored through ELL or receive support there, they go into the overall larger pool. So they may be very successful, in that subgroup, but then if they are no longer part of that subgroup, they're part of the larger subgroup. Obviously, that's something we want to be aware of. So it doesn't tell that whole story. And I do agree, our staff work very hard to meet the needs of all the students. And this is one of many measures that we utilize to report on how our students are doing. The next report that you'll receive on our school report cards, when that comes out, that takes more than just overall proficiency in. And I will say that the way that report is set up is one that does a little bit better job of showing the whole story, because it takes growth into account. But there are lots of things that one doesn't report on, which is involvement in other curricular areas. It also doesn't take into account the SEL work that we're doing, as well as student participation in other whole child experiences, such as co-curriculars and extracurriculars, things like that. So we'll be reporting out on that at that point in time as well, in what we've done the last couple of years, referred to as Report Card 2.0. And I do think this is a useful piece of information for us. As we went into this, we weren't surprised by the results that we saw. Our local measures were indicating that this is probably how our kids would be doing. I always share that I do not feel that state level assessment or any assessment should surprise us how we do, because we should have a pretty good handle on how our students are performing, which I feel very confident that our staff do. And then how do we spend our time being responsive to those needs?
David?
I just want to add, we've talked for quite a few years about the difference in our districts between, in the big rivers and that, as far as demographics, the amount of kids that in the non-school district that are on free and reduced lunches and that kind of stuff. And I go back to where a few years ago, even River Falls was pushing 70% proficiency, and now they're closer to 50% proficiency on their tests. And River Falls was always kind of the top dog for quite a while on that, as far as the testing stuff, but I don't think to characterize it as strictly a money issue, to me, isn't accurate, at least from my viewpoint. I think there's a lot of factors at play, but I think demographics is probably number one. I look at our local school in Downsville and some of the challenges that they've had with certain things, and a lot of things can affect it. But I've had 4 kids that have gone through the assessment testing program, and never heard them complain of a headache.
Are you telling me my kids don't get a headache and other kids don't?
No, you said every single kid that takes the test gets a headache. It's not all of them.
Actually didn't say that, but I said that my kids got headaches and other kids do get headaches. It's a lot of screen time. So I think it's important to get that we do have special challenges here. And if Brian's going to tell us that parents needn't be concerned if 70% of our students aren't proficient in grades 3 through 5 in literacy, and that 60% are proficient in math, we need to be able to explain why that is. So having some understanding of why there are differences in performance and different types of needs, different types of students, I think is very valuable there. So I would, especially it comes in from the reading chapter we had tonight about putting spin on where we're at. We need to be very realistic with where we're at. For most people, if they had a failure rate of 70%, they probably would lose their job. There's something wrong with the assessment, and we need to explain what that is to the people that are stakeholders in our district. Otherwise, the problem's on us. And that can't be, because their administrators are working very hard, our teachers are working very hard, and we need to understand why there's this gap in terms of meeting proficiency, which is not even just exceeding it, but it's what we think should be the bare minimum of what our kids should be getting coming out of school. And thinking about it, if you want some more information about the company that does the testing, they oversee the testing in some of the worst education states in the country. Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Nevada. This is a cut rate company. And we took them in this state because they were the cheapest, not because they were the best. And understanding how assessment operates and understanding how this particular company operates is really important. And a lot of it does have to do with economic. And I don't know if you know what the poverty rate is, but that's a family of 4 that makes $24,000 or less. A lot of people here have cars that cost more than $24,000. So that's something we need to take into account, but also we need to address head on. And if we aren't getting proper funding to cover the needs of our students that are disadvantaged in ways that other students in the state aren't, we need to be fairly vocal about that, because they're good kids.
Anybody else? Okay, I would just like to say, first of all, Brian, thank you for the report and for the PowerPoint. I think it was very helpful to see all that. One thing I would like to say is also to thank you for what you said about that this is not the only measure. And I think that's very important. As Chris and David both pointed out, and Dan, there are a lot of variables that are out there. And I guess I have never been a fan of testing. I'm not a good test taker, but I don't think I'm by any means low or a level of anything. And so I think that we need to be very careful how we take those things, because there's the whole child movement where it's everything. It's not just test scores. And we have good teachers, we have good administrators. And when you think about it, these kids take a test, and it's just a small window. And that small window, we expect them to perform at proficiency. I mean, there's so many variables that come with that. I mean, some kids may not have gotten any sleep at night. Maybe they didn't have breakfast. I mean, there's so many things out there that we need to be concerned about with that. I mean, and the sad thing is the state likes this because it's objective. Legislators like it because it's objective. But there is so much subjective information out there that we don't even, bring up on this, which is why I'm glad to say that the report card brings up more than just the test scores. So, but that's all I've got to say. Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, maybe Brian can explain this better, that this test isn't measuring all that our kids know and that we teach them, is it?
So the short answer is no. You know, like I said, what we're reporting this evening on the state level assessment, English language arts and math, two important areas, not the only two important areas, but two important areas for grades 3 through 8. And then the ACT assessment or the Aspire assessment assesses language arts, math, and science at the high school level. And it is, all three of those assessments are computer adaptive, but that's what it's reporting out on. And then the social studies piece and those identifiers as well.
So I guess what I was trying to say is there's a tremendous amount of learning that's not reflected in these tests.
Yes.
Soft skills, many soft skills out there, a test will not measure. Doesn't measure how kind you are, or how well you work, or play in the sandbox with other children, or that kind of thing. So there's lots of those things out there.
And to follow up on that, I think our kids are doing wonderful. Yeah. And our teachers are doing wonderful. So we just need to keep on doing good stuff.
All right, anybody else? Letter D, review final budget revisions for 2018-19, and I'll defer that to you, Joe, because Leah's not here.
Yes, excuse me. Leah did share the report with the board there. It's attached in board docs. You can see that the largest change has to do with the end of the year transfers that the board made as a very wise investment to put more money, more funds into our OPEB and our capital improvement fund. If there's any other questions, we're not asking to vote on that tonight, but we will be asking you to approve it at the next meeting. I could try to answer them, or I can always defer them to Leah. Anything tonight? Thank you.
Seeing none. Informational, review extracurricular staff contract requests. It's pretty much a standing informational. Any questions about that? And then items related to next meeting dates, board committees, and reports. Before we do our book study. I would like to say that, remember that October 14th will be our next board meeting, be a regular board meeting. It will also be Joe's quarterly evaluation. So policy says that the information has to go out a week ahead of time to you, so I will make sure that Joe and I will work on that and make sure that that documentation gets out to you, so you know that you need to bring that. And so there's no confusion. You fill it out on your own, but it stays with you. You don't turn it in. It's only the culmination in January for the actual evaluation. This is just a quarterly review. Any questions about that? Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so our next meeting is October 14th, and then that would make October 28th would be the next, right here, on my days.
Yep.
Okay. And then for some of us, we'll be going to the Watheby Regional Meeting at 6 p.m. at Off-Broadway Banquet Center. If you haven't registered for that yet, I don't know if the deadline's passed. I'm sure you talked to.
I can still register.
Talk to Jamie about that. It would be great to have a good bunch of board members there. And I know some people are getting awards. Jim and Penny and Heather, are you getting an award?
Dave is.
Dave, okay. So I know. Okay. So, all right. If that's all, we'll go into the book study. Administrators, I guess.
Yeah, your meeting.